Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Grace of a Military Child and Life podcast. Military families are not like your traditional family. They are strong, brave, resilient, and some of the most incredible people I know. My name is Gracie, a U.S. Army brat, and I am your host. I am honored to be able to give military family members like myself a place for them to share their stories and experiences in the military life. Stay tuned for this week's guest. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to a new episode of Grace of a Military Child and Life. Today, I'm here with Leah, who is a Navy spouse, a Navy veteran, Navy mom, Navy all around. So, Leah, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me what it was like. I mean, you have so much involvement in the military, but tell me what it was like being a military spouse first off.
So being a military spouse in its own right is just very, very difficult. I've had a lot of conversations on both sides of being active duty and then being a spouse. And I will tell you, the harder job for me was being the spouse.
Really?
Absolutely. When my husband was deployed and I was home with the kids and the refrigerator stopped working, the
Murphy's
car
Law.
got a flat tire, and then the kids got, sick, and oh my goodness. Oh, what a job. That's a job.
An unpaid job.
Yes, and it's full time.
Literally 24/7. You never stop.
Right.
Yeah. And then, so being active yourself and then stepping into that spouse role as well, you kind of really saw both sides of it. And I mean, military spouse, you said was harder, but what was it like on that active duty side of it?
So what's really interesting is I met my husband just after boot camp when we were in A school training together. So I really served my whole 20 years mirroring with his. In fact, we both retired on the same day together.
Oh, wow. That's special.
So it is. It was a really amazing experience for us to be together during that whole thing, and then just to finish together on the same day.
Right.
It was just like a huge celebration for us. So my whole time that I served, I was serving both active duty and as a spouse. And it would just rotate all the time. And, I had to wear two different hats all the time. And the Navy was always really good about making sure one of us was home with the kids when the other one was gone. And so there was a lot of rotation there, but there was definitely challenge in that too. Sometimes there was only 2 weeks of in between, like we call it ships passing in the night, where he'd come back and I'd be like, hey, this one has a project due on Tuesday. Bye, gotta go.
Yeah. For sure. And you can't necessarily predict what's going to happen when it's going to happen. You kind of have to really just roll with the punches of, okay, well, here we go again.
Absolutely. That's exactly where we were a lot.
Yeah, especially with kids. And it is nice, though, that, the Navy was very aware and keeping at least one parent home, because not everyone has those experiences.
Correct. There was some negotiations and trying to figure out a lot of logistics, but in the long run, it all worked out.
Yeah, that's awesome. And then, you lived it from both the service member and the spouse part of it, but now you're living it from the mom side of it. And so how has that changed your perspective?
Oh, wow. It definitely has given me a different perspective because, when I retired as a senior chief, which in the Navy is an E8. And so even though I was still leading all the time, E1s, E2s, E3s, I really got to see the different perspective of my son from the entry of his career, his view of boot camp, his view of A school, and his view of the Navy. And it was a really special advantage that I had to look at it like that. He did join just a few years before my husband and I retired. And so I really feel like I bonded more with my junior sailors after that because I saw their perspective a little bit differently because of my son.
Yeah. It is kind of cool that you kind of all got the chance to serve at the same time and not, you know, serving after you, and you kind of were all part of it. Not that you're not part of it anymore, but you were all actively part of it.
Yeah, my son's reenlistment was shortly, around COVID, and so everything was like hit and miss. But they let us on Zoom reenlist him for his second.
Oh,
And so it was just, a ceremony with my husband and myself and him and just being there for his reenlistment. And we've been able to, through Zoom, do his promotion ceremonies and his awards. And so it's really amazing that technology has allowed us to still all be involved in his different experiences.
yeah. I think from all aspects of the military life, technology has been such, it's such a vital piece of it because without it, you would, thinking back to those days of, Vietnam or, late 90s or late, like 19th century or whatever, those days. And so yeah, everyone communicated by letters. And I was watching Masters of the Air or something, the new Apple TV show. Well, not new by the time this airs, but I was watching that and it one of the service members told his wife or girlfriend, whatever, and said, "I've already written you a letter." And this was when they were still together before he left. And she's like, "Oh, well, like what did it say?" And he went, "Well, I guess you're gonna have to find out." And she's like, "Well, when's that gonna be?" And he's like, "In about 2 weeks." So, thinking of that's where we started of, letters being sent back and forth and 2+ weeks of not getting a letter or whatever the case may be to now where we can just hop on a Zoom call. We can, send a text message and, we're in these days where communication is so easy and it's so tangible now.
It is, but it's still very difficult from an aircraft
Yes.
carrier out to sea. And so we still
Right.
aren't there yet on that side, but it has come a long way. But I do remember my first deployment was in 2002, and we were still often, sending letters because phone calls were just so rare in between. Um,
Right.
but I remember, we were newlyweds and the emails would come all out of order on the ship. And so carrying on a conversation back and forth was just almost impossible. And then, as all newlyweds do, I remember a time that we got to fussing at each other and we had like an email argument. And and then we made up because we did. And then
Yeah.
3 days later, I got an email that he had sent before we made up. And then I got mad all over again. And I was like,
Oh my
oh,
gosh.
you didn't say that. I didn't know that. Now let's go back and argue about that. So we came up
Right.
with like this system where we put serial numbers on our emails so that we understood the series, the sequence of how they really came, because it's really important in context.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. You mean like just thinking about that, you never know, how things come through. And especially even with handwritten letters, like you could send a daily letter, but they're not going to get there in that order either. You really, that's why dating stuff. And I think you see that a lot more now.
Absolutely, yes. But it's come a long way. I mean, that was 2002. Definitely come a long way. But it was pretty cool for me to be able to see technology evolve in my service.
Yeah.
When my husband was stationed in Iraq, it was very rare. I think like 3 times he was able to like, get on the computer and we were able to see him face to face. And we thought that was like groundbreaking and amazing. And it really
Right.
helped us get through that deployment. So I really got to see it develop from like before it was there and then how it like kind of came to be and then how it's really grown. And you're right, it makes such a huge difference. When I was stationed in Syracuse University, I went to a photojournalism school there. And you have to do like the big end piece, the culmination piece.
Right.
And my piece was actually, it was called Operation Communication.
Oh, I love that.
This is where I followed a family whose dad was deployed when the son was just a few months old. And the mom was just petrified that when the dad would return, the son wouldn't remember him. And so she would do all different kinds of things to like keep his picture and keep his voice and keep them integrated. And this is right when they started doing different like Zooms and online. I think it was Skype back then, right? It was and and so I followed them all through this deployment. And then in the end, I went to the homecoming where they met. And
Oh,
I captured, first of all, homecomings, goosebumps.
yes. I
Uh,
know. Just talking about it.
yes, I feel it.
I
But
know.
being at his homecoming and then, being the photojournalist there and then seeing the little boy connect with his dad. And when he heard his voice, it clicked and all the tears, everything. And so I actually got to really dive into during that time technology and the way it was helping that specific family come along. And that was a really cool experience for me to see too.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Especially being part of a military family yourself and having that knowledge and that understanding, I think comes from a different perspective because having a civilian do that same project, it would probably be so different because they haven't necessarily lived through, what you've lived through at being part of a military family from, the various perspectives. And so it's really cool to see, everything coming along. And I love the Operation Communication. That's so cool.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's definitely fun to look and see because even my dad deployed in 2011 and it was a short-lived deployment due to his injuries. But in those 4 months, I only remember getting one letter. My mom got emails, but what 9-year-old knew how to use an email at that point, in 2011. Now it's probably a daily thing for, 9-year-olds to have an email, but, you're communicating via letter, you're communicating, Skype wasn't, a huge thing. It wasn't readily available. We didn't have Zoom. I don't know when Zoom came about, but it was definitely not then, not popular then.
Mhm.
So we've come a long, long way. And I love the making little mementos to be able to remember your service member. My mom and I were just talking about that the other day, that it's come such a long way because we see all these like military spouse influencers, having different ways and we made our own ways, but we didn't have that many resources, when we were that age. We did little Build-A-Bears with a voice box of my dad in
Mhm.
it, which I think that's a classic. And
Mhm.
we got a big jar of Hershey Kisses. And so we spent hours counting out little Hershey Kisses for me and my sister. It was supposed to be a 400-day deployment, so 800 kisses went in that jar and one for each day. So,
So
we
life
came a
hack
long
on
way.
that over in my 20 years, because we did it with M&Ms.
Oh,
Um,
yes.
always throw a couple in the end because Navy just puts you extra or military, right? Like
You never know.
when it's supposed to be 400 days and then so we learned, the extension thing and the other spouse that was home would just like drop a few more M&Ms in there when need be.
Yeah, you get the word that it's extended. You got to put a few extras and try and sneak them in there so the kids don't know.
Yeah, and then the age range of the kids, like some of them catch it and then some of them don't. And so, yeah, you got to really work there. But I actually wrote an article for All Hands several years back, and it was about different ways that service members can stay in touch when they're deployed and keep that family connection. And I put it like a bunch of tips and tricks, and of course, it's most of it is outdated at this point. But a few things that I did that I'd love to pass on is my daughters when they were teenagers and they were into reading books is I would get them the same book that I would take on deployment. So then
Oh,
we
yeah.
did get to talk. We got to talk about the book and where we were and because sometimes when I would call, it'd be like, how are you? Good. How are you? Good. How was school? Good. How was school? Good.
It's
And
actually
so
funny that you say that because my dad did that. And so the one letter that I do have from him, I was in like fourth grade and I didn't necessarily have the full interest, but he wrote on the bottom, he was like, P.S. I started the Harry Potter series because that was big when I was in school. And I didn't read that until I was in like seventh grade, but still like it was, hey, this is what I'm doing. So I love that you said that and that you did that.
yeah, we did the Disney villain series because we're a big Disney
Oh,
family.
yes,
And
I
so it
love
was really
Disney.
cool to see the villain series and follow that. So that was really special.
Yeah. No, ways to, because that's how you help stay connected, with millions or thousands of miles apart, you can't necessarily, have those conversations. Because when you're picking up your kids from school and you go, oh, how's school? You good? That's a suffice answer. But then when you're like trying to hold a conversation and you haven't talked to someone in days or weeks or months, it's like, okay, well, what do I talk about now?
Yeah, exactly. Or I would feel the pressure of like, oh, I only have 10 minutes. And so what are all the things that I want to fit in those 10 minutes?
Right.
Um, because when, early in my career, um, we paid per minute per phone
Right.
call. And if you used your minutes too early, you wouldn't have them later. And so we were very strategic about using our minutes on the phone, and then of course the pressure of, like you said, because the kids didn't have email, so I had
Right.
this one chance to just catch up with them on everything, and then the pressure made communication difficult.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I can't imagine, from like the kid's perspective, and I didn't necessarily get to talk to my dad over the phone until after his injury and he was in Germany. And he doesn't even remember it because he had so many medications and, it was just we made the most of it. But at that point too, it was like, okay, well, from the kid's perspective, what do I say? Like what is the important stuff? What do they have time for? Like, and what do you fit in? And, kids like to drag out their stories
Yes.
and they can't necessarily say, okay, this, and we're done. It's 5 minutes on one story. So there's so many different strategic planning that has to go into it.
Yes, and then you also don't want to say anything that could upset them or make them worry while you're
Right.
from home. Um, Probably the most frustrating conversation I've had was when my son, he was 4 years old, the one that's serving now, and I was deployed on the George Washington, and he got on the phone while my husband like went off to the kitchen to do dinner, and he said, "Mama, I'm not supposed to tell you, but we got a puppy." And I was like, who got a? I said no dogs. I said no pets. I said no dogs. I
Oh my
said none.
goodness.
And then I hear woof woof in the background. I was like, oh, and then I got like you have 1 minute to disconnect. Oh, like I
Blood
was
is
just
boiling.
fuming after that, and then waiting for the next phone call. And then, in fact, that's when I was sending all the emails to my husband. I was like, we said no dogs. We said no dogs. And those were the ones that like got out of like order. And
Oh my
yeah, so he
goodness.
dropped that. Like he was 4. Like, I'm not supposed to tell you. I'm like,
Well, and 4-year-olds, they don't have a filter. They could say, you could say, don't tell mom, and they're gonna tell mom anyways.
yes, I'm pretty sure that's what happened. I think it was like a we'll ease it in and surprise her at homecoming and or something like that. But he definitely spilled the beans early.
There was no homecoming surprise.
Oh no, I already knew.
Yeah, so there is one thing that I do want to ask you about and give you the space to share, but you have your own kind of mission now after being, away from service. And so can you tell listeners what that is and how it all started?
Sure. So I founded Sea Waves. Sea Waves is actually a acronym for a very long name, but
Oh,
I'm
I
going to
did
go
not
for
even
it.
know that.
Yeah, a lot of people don't because it's so long. So that's why I use the acronym. So it's support, education, and awareness, wellness and validation for eating disorders and self care. And so what it is a lot of what you just heard is just providing resources and support for military service members, veterans and their families who struggle with things like body dysmorphia or relationship with their food or relationship with their body, anything that just really affects their quality of life based off their body or food. And so when I was in the military, I struggled with eating disorders, different ones at different times, and finding resources and support was just really difficult for me. And then, as I became more of a leader and I found other people struggling with this, a lot, and just finding a lot of dead ends for them on getting them resources and support, it really frustrated me. And so I always knew I was going to do something after I retired, but I really thought that maybe I would do a podcast or a blog. And so I had no idea it was going to become a nonprofit. But one day, shortly after retirement, going through that transition of becoming a civilian after 20 years in the military is a really tough transition. And I was doing a lot of soul searching and a lot of journeying. And my mentor was like, well, I know you have an eating disorder, but does anybody else? And I was like, a couple people know. And he was like, you're never really going to heal unless like you're open and there's accountability. And so
Right.
I got like frustrated. I got like spiteful. And then, I may have had a glass or one or two. And I like got,
That's
I
okay. It's
got
all good.
yeah, it happened. I'm of age, and I got on social media on my LinkedIn, on my Facebook, on my IG, and I just blasted it to everybody at the same time, my friends, my families, my coworkers, and I was just like, "Y'all, I've been fighting the eating disorder for 3 decades, and I've been hiding it from you, and I've been hospitalized, and I lied when I was hospitalized, and like I just completely came clean." Um, Within about a minute and a half, I was like, what did I do? Like
Yeah.
delete, but it was too late. And so at first it was just extremely, extremely supportive, like friends and family, and even people that I, didn't think would get back in touch. They sent their support. But what's really interesting is what happened right after that. And that's kind of that it became a little bit of a Me Too movement. And different people were reaching out to me and they're like, well, that's me too. I struggle with that, or my sister struggles with that, or my uncle or my shipmate, and we were all coming together and they all asked the same question. Now what?
Right.
And I didn't have a good answer for now what because there really aren't a lot of resources or support. And so I struggled with the now what answer because I encouraged people to claim their issue and then they wanted the next step.
Right.
Um
Because there's always something more, even
yeah,
if
there
you don't
was
know what
other
it is.
yeah, like what do we do? And so I started just kind of becoming a bridge between the civilian eating disorder organizations and the military community that needed them. And I would just kind of, connect all those pieces. And it just grew to a thing that I was doing all day, every day and answering calls, and the call log became bigger than I could handle on my own. And so I was like, we need a team.
Right.
So we made a team. I made the nonprofit. The first thing I did as my nonprofit is I partnered with the crisis text line, and we made sure that their call staff is educated on eating disorders. And so you can text WAVES to 741-741 and reach somebody. They will talk about any topic, but they are one of the few places that can also talk about body dysmorphia and eating disorders. And if your struggle escalates above the knowledge of the call center, they also have vetted resources that I have vetted myself that I know are not dead ends or some of those health scams or anything like that.
Right.
And so that relationship was really important for me to build right away. So the other things that I do with that is I provide education and awareness to like military leadership and different bases. I hold training and just give like that 101 of like just understanding what others might be going through. And then the last thing I do with Sea Waves is I do like legislative advocacy. There's a lot of issues right now, with the SERV Act. Currently TRICARE won't pay for inpatient or residential treatment for anybody over the age of 20. And eating disorders and body dysmorphia, disordered eating affects any age, any race, any rank, anybody. And so we're really trying to get that more inclusive so treatment is available to everybody.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And so, so much kudos to you because you experienced it yourself and then saw other people struggling. And then, I hear a lot from military families as a whole after that disconnect, after retirement happens, experienced it myself of, well, this sucks. Like, what do I do now? And, for me, it was almost 8 years before I said, all right, well, and had the idea for the podcast that my mom gave me and started it myself and, found my way back into that community. But it's hard for that transition, out of military life. And so you get to that point and it's like, what do I do now? And I love those people who come back and they're like, no, this was a problem. Like, we're going to fix it. We're going to bridge that gap. We're going to step in where, the shoes are empty and help the next generation, because you're right. It's not something that's just going to go away overnight. And I mean, I don't know myself, but I would assume that a lot of women in the military struggle with this because, you have to fit in tape, you have to fit, all of these PT standards, and, not everyone does. And it's hard to put those expectations. And, there's one thing of physically fit and there's one thing of, not. But, there's so many standards and regulations placed that you feel like you have to fit in.
Yes. So the numbers are kind of, difficult to assess because, they're under acknowledged, and then reporting is very difficult. People in the military definitely don't want to report this, but
Right.
the numbers will tell you that 1/3 of females in the military community are suffering with disordered eating or eating disorder. But I want to go ahead and add one more piece there, and that's that males are suffering too. 1/5
Right.
of males in the military, and so that's still a significant number. 1/5 of males are struggling with that too, and so it goes back to what we were saying: is if it's any demographic is susceptible to this.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last thing, well, first off, where can listeners connect with Sea Waves and get involved and help or find resources themselves?
Sure. So everything's on the website. We have a volunteer form and lots of information and resources there. And so it's C-Waves. In the Navy, we call TAC. So C and then the TAC-waves.org.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the last thing I want to ask you, and not necessarily pertaining to Sea Waves, but pertaining to military life as a whole, but what advice would you give to another military spouse?
Don't go it alone. It's not meant to be held for a single person. This is a group thing. What keeps the military and spouses and families strong is our camaraderie. That's the best thing about us. And like I said, I saw it from the active duty side and from the spouse side and from the mother side. Is find somebody else that's I'll say in your boat, right?
Yes.
And don't go it alone. It's not meant for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Thank you, Leah, so much for being on the podcast and sharing so much and for continuing to help support the military community.
Thank you. And thanks for this opportunity. It was really great to meet you.
Thank you for listening to Grace of a Military Child and Life podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to give it a like, follow, and comment. Also, be sure to check out Instagram and Facebook at Grace of a Military Child and Life for more awesome content. For information on the podcast, Military Child Bigs and Littles, GoAMCL blog, or other resources, visit www.goamcl.org. You can also email me at Gracie That's gracie@goamcl.org with any questions or comments. To be a guest on the podcast, you can schedule it at www.goamcl.org/schedule a podcast, all one word, or contact me via social media or email. Stay tuned for the next episode where another incredible story is shared.